these reliefs, they have like a text that goes across the bottom that's, it's not like descriptive like a caption, but it's, that's more royal rhetoric, imperial rhetoric. So the imagery and then the text tend to go together in trying to convey the same thing, which is, we're unstoppable. You don't want to mess with us. So if we show up on your door,
give us our money.
Yeah, basically. It's a shakedown.
Bitch better have my money. You know what I mean? Except for the Assyrian version. So within this rhetoric, can you give us maybe an example of something that would be the sort of master narrative, and then how Isaiah or Ezekiel or Jeremiah or whoever you'd like to speak to, how they would have taken that and sort of flipped it on its head?
Yeah, so I'll as is my specialty, I'll maybe focus on the weapon related stuff.
Right.
So again, as we talked about in these narratives, sometimes it starts out with, I think in a few cases, Esarhaddon, if I'm not mistaken, we have like a description of kind of like, their first year and what happened. And, it's that same thing. Enlil gave me his crown and Ninurta gave me his weapon and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they receive these objects, these weapons, and then usually then they, in addition to saying, here now we've equipped you to be king, it's also like go out and conquer,
right,
is kind of this message. And they're doing it on behalf of the gods. And so they also, as I said, sometimes before a battle, especially a particularly intense battle, they might pray. I think there's one where the Assyrian king is maybe surrounded by his enemies and he's like worried. So he prays to the gods and, in answer to his prayer, right, as part of this, he gets like Ishtar gives him her bow to use, bow and arrows to use. And sometimes they receive, what amounts to like mythological weapons. So, Marduk from the Enuma Elish, that's the Babylonian kind of creation myth. He receives a weapon from the gods to go fight Tiamat. And, there's some implication in when the Assyrian king is praying and receives, he receives like the weapon that cuts off life, which other scholars have taken to be a reference to the Enuma Elish, which suggests that he might have received like this, mythological weapon. So not just the weapon of the god, but like a weapon from myth. And that plays out in other examples too. So they get these magical weapons that are supposed to help them be unstoppable, and then they go out into battle, and then the gods are on their side, empowering them, right? But I would say just to emphasize the king, because this is royal rhetoric meant to flatter the king, right? He is like the one that goes out and does he's got the weapon, he's swinging it around, people are dying left and right, he's the active participant. Sometimes he's running ahead of the army and they're having to catch up because he's such a badass, that sort of thing. So that's the kind of rhetoric that's floating around. And I would say coupled with that is usually this like, so it's not just that the king is great and invincible. He's pious. The gods love him. He always does what the gods want, right? So there's this, and then his enemies are always
the worst.
These people that trust in themselves. They trusted in themselves instead of the gods.
Oh,
that's kind of the rhetoric.
That sounds familiar.
And so he's there to show them up. And as another example, sometimes even other people's gods are unhappy with their people, and they're on the side of the Assyrian king too.
Right.
That can happen, where they're basically asking him to come in and conquer and restore the right worship of their correct worship. So that's some of the things that would be in the backdrop. Now, what does Isaiah do with some of this? In Isaiah 7, he takes this idea, right? So Yahweh is